Welcome, everyone. In this video, we're going to talk through the cards that have been released for the new Legend of Lils expansion. At the time of recording this video, only 145 of the 150 cards that we have been included in the in-game client. So I'm going to talk through those, and I also have two of the missing five cards. I have pictures of those, and the other three, I believe, have not yet been released. So as I make the series, I'm going to go first through the colorless cards and then through each of the colors. If we end up missing a card, I might have to circle back to it. Another thing to note is that unlike a traditional card review video where you have no experience with the cards, we kind of have a weird situation here where for the past month we've had the sneak peek event. And in the sneak peek event, basically through a series of 4 weeks, they released sets of roughly 50 cards at a time. So 50 cards for the first week, then the next week 50 more cards, and then 50 more cards. So we could kind of like play them out in this kind of sequential manner. And so at the end, we had most of the new set live, but there were a bunch of cards that were banned because there were a lot of bugs with them. So, and the meta never really had a chance to properly develop. So, I do think that we already have some indications of some of the cards which we know are going to be strong. So, like, I'll try to call that out whenever I base my opinion on experience I have with actually playing the card. One more thing, the reason we're starting with colorless is just because such a key part of this set is the locations. There's a lot of mechanics around locations. So I figured it would be good to knock out the locations right at the beginning. So when other cards reference locations in the future, right, we know what type of cards are available to them. So the first card that we have is Parasol Rod. And it basically says when this rod enters play, choose a rod and unflop it. So during sneak peek, this saw zero play, or at least I didn't see any play with it. But it does seem like a card that, it is eventually going to be very strong. Because, right, there are some rods we have. Like I think Rod of camaraderie, maybe. Where there's a rod that says like flop this rod, gain a fish for every penguin you have. Um, or there's stuff like that. So there are these like rods that can become really powerful. And so Parasol Rod could be a rod that's like in play, letting you use that powerful rod twice. I don't think it's that powerful. I think there's going to be some broken deck at some point that uses this in it as a utility card, most likely. But yeah, I think right now with the existing card set, I just don't see that deck. All right, so let's move to our first location, which is Opera House. So Opera House says at the start of action time, each player with exactly 6 cards in their hand draws a card. Whenever another location enters play, ice this relic. So on its face, this card is insane. Like one extra card draw a turn for just meeting a condition that should be possible to meet turn after turn just seems great, right? So you play Opera House, and then you need to, if you have 6 cards in your hand, you draw an extra card, which means you're basically drawing 3 cards a turn. And so as long as you can just maintain that hand size exactly, and there's not really that much hand disruption from your opponent, so you can pretty much basically just keep playing the 3 cards every turn. So you don't want this in a heavy deck because you have to be able to play 3 cards. But yeah, so I think the big challenge with this relic is how are you going to get to 6 cards in your hand? So right, you start with 5 cards, and you're basically playing a look. Yeah, most decks end up losing cards over time, not gaining them, just because there's card draw is so difficult. So right, so what type of deck would this need to go through? So I think anyway, so I think if you pull off the condition, and right, locations are very fragile. So I think that's another thing where any other location can displace it, like a Mount Fuji. But so it's like hard to build your whole combo around a location because right, if the whole combo of the deck is built around the location, your opponent very likely will play their own location and disrupt it, or any other relic removal. So, so yeah, so I think it is strong. I think I don't know exactly what deck it fits into, but I do feel like there's some sort of deck that like wants a big hand size and kind of sits back, and then this just is such card advantage. Like we have so little card draw in here. Now I do wonder because they only made this cost 1 fish, so it must not be good. Because if this was really as good as I kind of think it would be, it would cost more than 1 fish. So in play testing, this must have been terrible. But yeah, anyway, I just feel like this card can be really good. So anyway, let's see what I just I'm not really that good of a deck builder, so I can't really see the deck right now that this would be good in. Lil with Balloon, this card is great. It's already seen a bunch of play in the sneak peek event. What makes this card so good is there are a set of decks that do not care about Pudge. So specifically like green mega caffeine decks. And they just want to be aggressive and win vibe checks. And for 2 Pudge, the only thing you can do better than Lil with Balloon is Introvert Penguin, which is 6 Vibe. But Introvert has this huge problem where when you play Sneaky Penguin the next turn with it, it all of a sudden stops participating in vibe checks. Whereas Lil Balloon will continue to participate in vibe checks. So yeah, maybe you'll be less likely to win the second vibe check. But again, right, everything else is 4 vibe. There's not anything else that's 5 vibe on turn 2. So it like functionally is the same as Little Introvert or Introvert Penguin, with the one exception being in the mirror match. But yeah, anyway, I think Lil Balloon is better than Introvert Penguin. I think, as I've played it, it's been so great. Also, this is one of my favorite arts in the set. I think it looks really cool. So, yeah. Anyway, this card is great. I think it's going to see a ton of play. Now, that being said, I guess one thing I'll call out is I think there's a difference between being good and seeing a lot of play and being meta defining. So, like, it's not like this card is like the meta is going to warp around this card. It's just like a good supporting actor, solid. There's a type of deck that doesn't care about Pudge that's going to love this. Mount Fuji, now this is a great card. This card already is seeing a ton of play, and it says whenever this relic enters play, each player names a penguin card. Penguins with those names lose all abilities. Whenever another location enters play, ice this relic. So this card is like a Swiss Army knife that goes well in decks that are trying to be a little more controlling. So what can it do? Or it also really works well in very aggressive decks. So the first thing it can do is it can shut off Popcorn Penguin. So one of the big problems is there's really no good way to deal with Popcorn Penguin without getting 2-for-1 card advantage, right? They play the Popcorn Penguin. They immediately ice one of your penguins. And then you have to use like a not your keys on it. And all of a sudden you've spent 2 cards and they spent 1 card. And aggressive decks really don't like negative card advantage. But with Mount Fuji, they play Popcorn Penguin. You play Mount Fuji, all of a sudden the Popcorn Penguin just gets deactivated. So now, from a card advantage perspective, it's 0 for 0. And then you can even remove the popcorn in case they remove your Mount Fuji. And so then all of a sudden you take away the strength of Popcorn Penguin. It also, though, can be really good. Like against Bizbunk, just turn off their Ascending, turn off their Bunkus, turn off their, against Blue, turn off their Binkus, turn off their Penguin who's okay. Against Recycler, again, you can turn off the Penguin who's okay. Against pretty much every deck. Oh, against Caffeine, turn off their Green Mega Penguin. Then all of a sudden the Caffeines flop the Green Mega Penguin. So there are just so many different situations it can be powerful. And on top of that, it's a location. So it can be used to remove your opponent's locations. So it's also removal for their locations. So it just does so many things. It's only 2 Pudge. This card is great. It's going to see a bunch of play. The symmetrical effect of it is definitely a downside where your opponent can choose a card in your deck. So, for example, let's say you're playing a yellow Yum Yum type build. Then I'm not sure if you want to play Mount Fuji because they can turn off your penguin that doesn't mind goodbyes. And that is actually a pretty big problem for you because, that deck is really built around penguin that doesn't mind goodbyes. So, overall, I'm not sure. It's not like every deck is going to play this, but there are certain decks that don't really mind where the abilities on the penguin aren't so important. And on those decks, this card is going to be absolutely amazing. Next, we have some multicolor cards. So there's 5 of these. There's Feather Forecast, which is green and purple Pudge producing relic that says when this relic enters play, choose a penguin, put a vibe counter on it. We've also got Glass Act, which is yellow and green. We've got red and blue, which is Glow and Behold. Half Past Chill, which is yellow and blue. And then purple and red, which is Potion Commotion. So the first thing that's really interesting about these cards is we see how the vibes, I think their standard color wheel is established. So when you think about a card game that has 5 colors, there's like, how do you combine the colors? And I think this is a very interesting choice of the color wheel to think about what colors that they thought would be appropriate to put together. Because the one obvious thing that they didn't do is put blue and purple together, right? And up until now, blue and purple have been the 2 colors that I would say are the closest to each other. I mean, there's even a term for it, like the Blurple deck. And because they're both like, Penguin Who's Okay is a card that works so well in purple, but is a blue card. Um, so they didn't want to put more energy behind the Blurple idea. But I think there's some other color combinations that are interesting. So I think like yellow and blue is definitely one that I think has a lot of promise. I think that's kind of your more like traditional like control-y shell where it's yeah, I think, like I don't know, I just feel like yellow has a lot of card draw, blue has, like, these control-y cards, so I think there might be something with, like, Wild Knight, and then like more like a control deck like that. I think the Potion Commotion. So I've been spending a lot of time with this card. I think purple and red is such a good combination together, just because just because of the way that a drop of attention works with overwhelm with knowledge, and they're both kind of like these things that like removal and drawing a bunch of cards. So I think that this is definitely a color combo that has a lot of legs. And then I think red and blue is like kind of the beatdown deck. Like we already Bash Globe is already red and blue. And so like red and blue are these just kind of like, hey, remove your stuff, like kind of big brute like bashful swordsman, stuff like that. So I think there's a lot of energy in that combo. Purple and green, I I just don't get this combo. It just seems really awkward. Like those two colors just have like nothing to do with each other. The way that I feel that they play. Like green is like big creatures and purple is, you know, I don't know. It's like ice your own deck in general, but purple is also now the location color. So I do think that the colors are going to change over time what they do. So this is just one where I'm just struggling to see how these two colors work well together. But again, like I said, I'm sure that doesn't mean that there's not a good deck out there. And then green and yellow, I think this is also let's see. So that can maybe work. I think maybe the thing is just I just like green is not a color that works so well with other colors. Green is kinda just doing its own thing. But again, like, right, green does have a lot of control elements as well. So maybe there is some sort of like it's just like green also has really expensive actions and yellow has expensive actions. So like when you combine them, it might be hard to get enough pudge. Like yeah, I guess like green and yellow each kind of just want to have a lot of pudge. So I'm not really sure about that. But anyway, let's not talk about the color combinations per se. Let's just talk about the card itself. And the card itself is just really, really strong. I think these are going to see so much play, and there's a few reasons for that. The first one is like if you're going to build a two color deck, you need to have this like playing two color pudge because it just makes it so much easier to make the actions work. And so I think like just having a good source of pudge is really good, especially because too much caffeine can't flop it, right? Because it's not a penguin, it can be not flopped by too much caffeine. Plus, I've been using this a lot with, like I said, with a drop of attention, and I've been using a glass act with Yum Yum. And what's really cool is when you clear the board, they don't get cleared. So A, if you are protecting yourself against board clears, they'll stay on the board. And then B is if you're actually proactively doing board clears, right? You can clear the board, but you can kind of keep your stuff. So if you want these like really like controlling decks, like I could see some sort of blue control deck that would love to just play like half plus chill or glow and behold, because right, you clear the board and then you still have something on the board for the next turn. And then the vibe counter. The vibe counter is really useful. I'll talk a little bit more about Potion Commotion because that's what I have a lot of experience with. So, for example, Adventure Squad is a card that purple likes to use, but the problem is it's so easily countered by Gotham. But with Potion Commotion, say you have like a prosperous penguin, you put a vibe counter on it, all of a sudden it's 3 vibe. Um, I also often when I'm playing against yellow aggro, putting the vibe counter on the opponent's penguin, because like yellow aggro really wants to lose every vibe check because they want cards, they don't want rods. So by putting vibe counters on your opponent's penguins, you can specifically lose the vibe check, um, and then that can just kind of help kind of prevent the yellow aggro from snowballing. Then one other thing is if we just think about if we think about just the yellow +1 counter build, we'll talk more about that when we go through the yellow cards, but yellow has this real big theme in the set about having +1 counters. Um, these cards are just absolutely crazy for those because, right, you not only get all the other benefits I talked about, but it's a trigger. So if you play this on your stargazing penguin, for example, you will then get a additional vibe counter from the stargazing, and maybe you have a little introvert extrovert on the board. So all of a sudden you're getting like 4 vibe counters for the price of just playing one glass act on your penguin. So it can just really snowball out of control how that deck works. And this is just a really good way to get a vibe counter in the what's it called? On your turn, not in the action phase. Next, we have Statue of Liberty, which is another location that says when this relic enters play, each player may choose a penguin in their huddle, or each player chooses a penguin. Um, Put them under this card until it leaves play. So Statue of Liberty, like this seems like there is a deck for this. I just don't know exactly what it looks like because the way that this would work is you'd have a lot of penguins that have enter the huddle effects. So then you play like Statue of Liberty. Let's say you have a penguin who zooms. or penguin, a zooming penguin, basically that like bounces a opponent's penguin to their hand. So you play Statue of Liberty on it. So you remove one of their penguins with Statue of Liberty, and then you remove your own penguin, zooming penguin. Then you play then maybe you play a what's it called? The Pop and Pete to return Statue of Liberty to your hand. Your zooming penguin comes back, bounces another one of their penguins. Then you play Statue of Liberty again. Then the penguin of zooming penguin goes away again. Then you play Tina Who Tears to bring the zooming penguin back. And so you could just kind of have this thing where like the Statue of Liberty just keeps bouncing in and out of play, making your penguins bounce in and out of play. And so yeah, so that's how this would work. Is this good or is this just too complicated? I think that's a question. Like, sure, if all the right support cards are there for that type of strategy, it could be really strong. But I'm not really sure because it just seems like a lot. Like the payoff isn't quite there, I think, with the current cards. But maybe someone will figure out a deck. Definitely that's the direction I would go with this. Easter Island is another location that says whenever a player plays an action, that player boosts the vibe of penguins in their huddle by 1 for the rest of the cycle. This seems not good. So right, you're playing a bunch of actions and just boosting up, but there's just like so many better payoffs for playing a bunch of actions. Like Screaming Penguin gets 2 vibe. There's yeah, I just feel like there's a lot of other things that if you're gonna play a kind of super action heavy deck, that's gonna be better than Easter Island. Because also like Easter Island spreads the vibe out over your entire huddle. So maybe if there's some sort of card that said like draw a card for every penguin that you have with a vibe greater than 5, or I don't know, something like that. Maybe this would work. I just don't see it. I think this card's bad. But again, right? We'll see. Part of the fun of making this video is for you guys to tell me later how wrong I was. But I'm putting this card in the bad pile. Little Bellyaker. This card must be great, I think. Ice another penguin in your huddle, and this card has been bugged, so we haven't seen it in play. Search your deck for a little penguin with fish cost 1 greater than the fish cost of the penguin you iced. Put it into your huddle. Shuffle your deck. So basically, this lets you just build a chain of penguins. So there's going to be some deck where you have the exact right chain of penguins, especially like right. Think about the 6 fish cost. 6 fish cost. You have like penguin, the little zooming penguin. So you play a little Bellyaker. You ice your 5 cost penguin. You get your zooming penguin, and then you ice that to get your 7 cost penguin. So I haven't gone through and studied like, is there a good progression of penguins? Like a good like, like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You probably have to play at least 2 copies of each one in your deck in case you draw one. So it's going to be a big commitment on the deck. It's going to have to be built around this card. But right, especially if there's more little penguins later, right? Like if little penguins are something that, over time, like multiple sets keep having more little penguins, then this card eventually is just going to become absolutely crazy. Because the other thing is you can do this like in response to stuff. So you have your penguin, they play not your keys on it, boom, little Bellyaker, and then all of a sudden you've negated the not your keys. So I don't know. I think this card is it may not be great yet, but eventually it's going to become great. And I think even now there's going to be a good deck built around it. Leaning Tower. So this is one of my favorite cards in the set. I have not been able to get this card to work yet, but I think this card is just absolutely like broken strong. Maybe I'm gonna be wrong on this again, but it says flop penguins now participate in vibe check and unflop penguins do not participate in vibe check. All right, so and its location. So why do I think this is so strong? So first, let's just think about this card with Bashful Swordsman. So with Bashful Swordsman, so there's 2 situations that can happen. Either A, your Bashful Swordsman is unflopped and your opponent's penguins are flopped. Well, guess what? The Bashful Swordsman is just gonna ice every single card time that they win a vibe check with their flopped penguins. Secondly, if it's flopped, it doesn't ice itself. So like there's gonna be some sort of deck that's focused on like flopping and unflopping. Strategically unflop your opponent's penguins or flop your penguins, or unflop, and then so it's like a card probably blue because blue already has a lot of the flopping and unflopping mechanics in it. Again, I during sneak peek I was unable to make this work, but I think some deck builder is going to figure out a way to make this really powerful. It's also like it is such a good counter to green mega penguin caffeine decks. So if caffeine decks are powerful, this card is just so good because right, the green mega penguin can never get flopped from the caffeine, and your stuff you basically have complete control over what you want to flop. Sure, they might have their own bashful swordsman, but so you just need a little bit of removal to take care of their bashful swordsman, and this card like single handedly takes care of caffeine decks. So I think this card is great. Um, Also, just think about it like I was trying to make this work in like a yellow a vibe counter deck because just yellow has so many actions. So you just play like a frolic on your final turn. You've now flopped 3 penguins. You have 3 giant penguins that are all flopped. Like, what can your opponent do about that? And a lot of decks right now don't have a lot of actions in them, so that it's actually difficult for decks to flop their own penguins some of the time. So or like, for example, think about green deck with cleanup good. Cleanup good, you can't even flop the penguin because it unflops itself. So this card just like basically puts the whole deck on its head, whole game on its head. I love it. I think this is one of the best design cards in the set. I'm a Yeah, but let's see if I'm right on it. All right, Eiffel Tower. Enter the huddle abilities triggered twice. All right, another location. So this card, um, yeah, so okay, so the payout the issue with this card is you play it and you don't get the payout till the following turn, and it's 6 fish. So, right, like, you play Enter the Huddle abilities, your penguins but, like, you play this for 6, your opponent can remove it by the time you get your first Enter the Huddle abilities. Now, that being said, Enter the Huddle abilities are some of the most strongest abilities in the game from the standpoint of like you still keep your penguin. So like think about it like a penguin, the zooming penguin returns 2 stuff to your opponent's hand. Brainy penguin. You would go through so many cards in your deck. Um, what else? Penguin who might bring a +1. You get to look at 2 cards. Um, yeah, a prosperous penguin. You get two free, basically double card advantage. So like I think there is a deck that uses this. I don't know about what the deck looks like, and I don't know if that deck is good. Six fish just is a lot for this, just because again, right? Some of these locations, like right, one thing when you think about card games is you really need your cards to do something the turn you play them. Like cards that you just play out there and just don't immediately affect the board. Like this is why a card like Romulus is just not going to be good long term in the game. You just like while the card pool is small, you can get away with that, but like really your cards have to all do something right away. And so I think that's where Eiffel Tower, I'm a little worried about that it's a little slow just because the effect takes all the way till the next turn. And your opponent, some of these things, like some of these locations, because they're all symmetrical, like Leaning Tower, I think is harder for your opponent to. There's going to be decks like Bizbunk and Eiffel Tower. Bizbunk would love you to play an Eiffel Tower because of Brainy Penguin. So, right, I feel like there might be, or like Bash Globe also, Penguin who zooms. Like, there's a lot of Enter the Huddle penguins are played, which then just means that the Eiffel Tower is potentially helping your opponent too much. All right, Penguin Hoop's belly aches. Choose a rod you control and return it to its owner's hand. So this is basically like an infinite bounce house rod. But I think this card has a really, really big problem. And the problem is the reason bounce house rod is good is because it happens like the card you bounce back, you play immediately. So like, right, you need that popcorn penguin because your opponent played a popcorn penguin. But this happens in the action time. So that means rods that are penguins are not that good with this card, but rods that are actions are really good. So this would be good, right? Because the return to your hand happens in the action phase, you want to play this in some sort of maybe a red or purple deck where you do this and then you get back like your adventure squad or something like that. So I don't think this is going to be good in the setting that Bounce House Rod is good, just because Bounce House Rod is a very bouncing penguins or basically bouncing non-action cards. This is going to be good for bouncing action cards. So you need an action-heavy deck. I think we'll talk little preview when we talk about Coliseum. I think action-heavy decks are in trouble. But if action-heavy decks end up being good, this card could be good. It is, yeah. It's still the whole like bouncing rods to your hand mechanic. A lot of decks just don't like that because it's actually really hard to get rods down, especially like in red, for example. We have so many other things. Like we have Sheesh in this expansion, so there's a lot of cards that kind of do the same thing as this, or enter the bounce house dimension. So I don't think red is really that good because red has a lot of good other options. I don't think the traditional bounce house rod decks are good. So maybe something with purple. I don't know. But then right, purple has this whole way of just cycling through the ice. So I don't really know. I This card just feels awkward and slow to me. Pongo. Okay, this card. Whenever Pongo enters a huddle, put 8 vibe counters on it. Pongo doesn't participate in vibe check. Whenever you play an action, remove a vibe counter from Pongo. If it was the last one, search your deck for a penguin card, put it into play, and shuffle your deck. Okay, so this is like a build around card. So again, this is not the final combo deck, but it is part of the combo deck. So the question is, what penguin are we going to put into play? So eventually, Vibes is going to have some like 40 fish penguin that then Pongo is just so good with, right? Like, so some sort of deck where the payoff is so good. But now I think what do we've got? We've got maybe Lil Vibes a lot or Survives a Lil might be the best penguin. But even that, it's just like they can just remove it. So I don't think we have like once we get a penguin that basically says when this penguin enters the board, the game, win the game, but it's really hard to get in, then this card would be good. But I think right now the payoffs just aren't there. Like we don't have something that's worth it to go through all this because you have to build your like to get 8 actions played, that's a lot. Like so especially because you can't even start until turn 6 and this doesn't even produce pudge. So I don't know. I think it's bad for now, but I think it's going to eventually there's gonna be some deck. Maybe it's gonna be a meme deck, but eventually there's gonna be a penguin that this is worth going through all the effort for. Next, we have Sphinx, which is another location that says whenever a penguin enters the huddle, its controller draws a card. All right, so let's think about Sphinx. So Sphinx would be good if we have a bunch of small penguins, right? But the issue with having a bunch of small penguins is Sphinx costs 7 fish. So if you have a deck with a lot of small penguins, can you really get to 7 fish? So then it's like, okay, so then we need maybe like kind of like the yellow starter deck. Something that has like an extrovert. Like this would go well with extrovert with the like trampoline rod, penguin who zooms. So you want kind of a deck like that. But again, I think one of the challenges with this is you can't do it on the same turn you play it. Right? This is why same issue with Eiffel Tower. You play 7 fish, you pass your opponent, there's a chance, especially if you were winning the vibe checks, they can do it that same turn. I guess that's the same thing with Enter the Huddle or with Eiffel Tower. Like, if you are not losing the vibe check, then they get a whole extra turn of this double sided effect. And it's such a generic effect. This one's even more generic. So I don't know. I think this is going to be tough to make work. I think, because, right, this would be then in a deck where the other payoff card would be like Extrovert. But Extrovert is just not that good of a payoff card, which is why the yellow starter deck just isn't that good. Like, I mean, it's not bad, but it's just not tier one. And the reason is like they just remove the extrovert or they like flop it with caffeine or whatever. And so, yeah, I don't know. I'm not so excited about Sphinx. I don't think it's that good. But we'll see. Let's move to Great Wall. So Great Wall, now this is good. I think the reason Great Wall is good, whereas Sphinx and Eiffel Tower are not good, is because you can use it like the turn you play it immediately. So this is like a finisher. And I've already seen people playing this in mill decks. So basically the idea is you play Great Wall and then you do like 5 or like 4, like 2 or 3 cool story bros and some what's it called? The sick pull. So you can end up like icing easily like, 12, 15 cards from your opponent's deck all at once. Especially then if you even have some more actions, because those are all zero cost rods. So like in a mill deck, this I think can be a great finisher, especially because mill decks very often have a lot of rods because you're using send it too hard, which means you're just playing a bunch of rods because they're it's just more of like an aggressive E deck where you just want to play a rod every turn. Then clear the board, then you play Great Wall. Then you just play all your zero cost actions and maybe also some non-zero cost actions. So I think Great Wall and Mill is already an interesting shell for it. But I just think overall what makes this card good relative to Eiffel Tower and Sphinx is you can use it the turn you play it. Especially because like right, Eiffel Tower and Sphinx also I didn't like if you win the vibe check you play, they can just play another relic to remove it or a Tina Who Tears or something like that. Whereas Great Wall, um, right, there's less chance. Like if you're losing the vibe check, they can't respond to it. So anyway, I think this card is good. I think this will see play, and I think that the blue shell is already a good shell for it. But maybe there's going to be even better use cases for it. Colosseum. All right, I have a lot of thoughts about this card. I think there's 2 things I don't like about it. Yeah, so well, let's first talk about like what happened with this card during the sneak peek event. This card started being put in Green Mega Penguin caffeine decks, and it just completely took over the game. And it was like a day and a half where that was all that was played, and it was a very oppressive deck. But then it got banned because there was a critical bug with it. So I do think that my experience with it might be tainted just because it was so powerful during that time, but there was a bug with it that made it even more powerful than it actually is. So potentially in its bug fix form, it won't be actually good. It might be bad. I really hope that's the case. And so to talk a little bit about what this card is and what the bug was, it says players may look at and play the top card of their decks. Players cannot play cards from anywhere else. Um, so what the bug was that you could not rod from the top of your deck. So the way Coliseum is supposed to work is you can basically you also play your rods. And so you play your rods from the top of the deck as well. But because that was broken and you still played your rods from your hand, what would happen is if you were an action heavy deck, right, as soon as you hit an action on the top of your deck, you're done. You can't play anything, which happens, if your deck has 40, 50% actions, that happens half the time. So you can't play anything during your fish phase. But what's supposed to happen is you're supposed to play that action as a rod, and then you get to see another card. And so in that situation, right, it can really help. You can as a deck that's not designed for Coliseum, you can do a much better job, like actually going through the top of your deck. Now, the reason this card is so strong is it basically means your hand is useless, right? Because you're just playing off the top of your deck. And so, like, I think one of the issues that Vibes already has is one of the best ways to play the deck is just to play aggressive decks that just, dump your hand onto the deck. You end with 0 cards in your hand, or maybe just with one spring a leak. Like Bash Globe works like that, Caffeine works like that, Green Aggro works like that. Basically, all the decks other than Bizbunk work like that, and this card is just such a good finisher for them because they don't need cards in their hand. So basically, if your opponent is trying to play a control card advantage game, you basically Colosseum completely negates that. So you basically have one card in your deck that just completely makes up for the fact that you just were not really worrying about keeping hands cards in your hand and just vomiting everything on the board. So then so that's the thing one I don't like about this. It really just there's a type of deck that is already really, really strong, and this card just makes that type of deck even stronger. Now, the other thing with this is it really makes action heavy cards much weaker because actions in vibes are already really, really difficult relative to non-action decks. And the reason for that is because of the two-tiered resource system. So I love the two-tiered resource system because it's like, you play your penguins to then create Pudge, which creates your actions. Because lots of other games, right, when the action cards are not, they don't require penguins to be on the board. What the action cards do is, right, a lot of the decks are just all action cards because action cards are in general better than having stuff on the board because they're not vulnerable to getting removed. And so with vibes, it's really nice because it forces you to be on the board. So the core way that the game works already is such a buff to penguins into these like more board centric play styles. So then Coliseum comes in and just like really makes it very difficult to play action heavy decks. If it ends up being good, right? I'm still holding out judgment on that because right, we only saw it in its bugged form and we didn't have a chance to build decks around it. So for example, like I think Leaning Tower would be really good against Coliseum decks, which is another reason I like Leaning Tower. Um, so then right, we have the situation where the card itself again, like it is going to be a linear strategy, so it's going to be beatable. But I think the thing I just don't like is it's going to be beatable by a very specific type of deck. And that specific type of deck is going to be a deck that is not an action heavy deck. Although, right, maybe there is one specific deck, but it's just like this card that I think is going to really warp the metagame. All right, the last one is arches. So this is the big 10 fish location. It says whenever a penguin is flopped, its owner gets a fish sickle. All right. My brain can't even handle this card. Like, what is the purpose of this? So you want, so you already have a bunch of. I guess this goes in the fishsicle deck because you get a bunch of fishsicles to play arches. Um, and then you flop a bunch of penguins to get more fishsicles to then play your survives a little. But again, I would say if you have 10 fish to play arches, why don't you just play survives a little directly? So then you need some sort of like condition where you just want a lot of fishsicles. So I tried to make the physical deck work in I tried to make it work in green and I was unable to do it. But that doesn't mean again like I'm not a good deck builder. So I wouldn't say that just because I couldn't get it to work. So I guess this could go in the physical deck. I just feel like it's so slow. It's too fragile. I don't know. I don't think this is good. I think, but maybe there's some deck that's really broken that uses this, but I think it's unlikely. Zooming out, I think overall there have been such game-changing cards added to the colorless section, which I think are going to really change how the game is played, which is very exciting. So I think we've got Mount Fuji, which is again just I think such an amazing card. Lil with Balloon again, right? This is going to just really be a good boost on other decks. I think these relics here, the pudge producing relics, also are going to be very played all the time. I think Lil Bellyaker is going to be a whole deck built around this. Then Leaning Tower also I think is another build around card. Great Wall is a build around card, and then of course we've got Colosseum, which is another card that is just so powerful, and I think it's going to also warp the metagame. So overall, we've got a bunch of things too, and again, like I don't even want a Statue of Liberty. Also, I think potentially strong. I still haven't quite figured out how to use it, but it just seems like there's a lot of potential there. So overall, I think the neutral cards are going to have a big impact. And yeah, I'm really excited to kind of see how they find their way into the metagame. All right, so there you have it. Those are the colorless cards of the Legend of Lowe's expansion. Thanks everyone for watching. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time.